So, good morning, Louise. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, doing really well. So, let's kick things off. In 60 seconds, can you sum up your journey through learning development?
Wow. So I've been in learning and development for probably about coming up to 20 years now. Started off, I think, as most people do, and sort of fell into learning and development. So I was working in a totally unrelated role. I was asked to cover our HR function, and by the time I'd covered the HR function at the end of it, I was asked to move into L&D. So started off as a learning and development coordinator, single site, just looking after the one site and building up the profile of that site, building the department up from scratch. I was then given a secondary site to look after, so went to two sites. I was then given more of a UK role as well, so that was looking after more and more sites. And now I am a group learning and development manager looking after 6 UK sites in total.
Amazing. And did you mention that previously on before we had the podcast that you specialise in one industry? Have you worked? Just give us a bit of background on that one.
Yeah, so I have always been in either engineering or manufacturing. So for my sins, so I've done, as I said, I've done aerospace manufacturing, I've done automotive manufacturing, and I've done food manufacturing. And the difference between the three different genres is very, very different indeed.
Yeah, and as I mentioned before this, I'm excited for this podcast because it's coming at it from a different perspective. So, can you walk us through the steps you take when you walk into a company with no L&D function to creating one?
Yeah. So most companies will have some L&D going on in the background. So it is a case of trying to understand what they've got initially. So the first thing I always do is I obviously come in and then I ask questions. And it's what have you got? What have you done previously? What have you got in the pipeline, and things like that. So it's understanding where the business is at the moment. There'll be a lot of time where different departments will be looking at different things, and they will keep things very close to their chest. So the first thing I really try and do is build those relationships with the key stakeholders. So from day one, the first thing is put meetings in with all the senior management team of the site. Obviously, if it's a single site, it's a lot easier than if it's multi-site. If it's a single site, you can build those relationships quite quickly. If it's a multi-site, it's more difficult because you have to get around the sites. And for me, it's building those relationships face to face as well. I know we all like to use Teams and things now, but to actually get a good grounding with people, I like to meet them face to face. So the first thing I will do is obviously put some time in with all the senior management team and ask them what they want from me. I am a support function. I am there to support the business. I may have my own agenda of what I want to do, but actually that needs to fit in with what the business wants. And if it doesn't fit in with what the business wants, then I am not going to achieve what I need to achieve. So first and foremost, I ask them what they want. Then we start to have a look at where our gaps are. So my first thought is always, are we legally compliant? So that's making sure we've just got the basics of health and safety training. We've got the basics of things like sexual harassment training that if we don't have them in place will cause the business a risk. So a lot of it is assessing risk initially. We then sort of look at what does our customer want from us. So being in automotive now that I am, we have a lot of customer audits and we have what we call our ATF audit, which is basically if we don't pass these audits, we cannot supply our customers. So without knowing what they want, I don't know whether we're actually meeting their needs as well. So they, for me, are the first things I will always look at when I go onto sites.
Love that. So, when you mentioned about the stakeholders, are there a key department, so I'm assuming HR, but are there key departments that you tend to prioritise? If you can explain a little bit about that approach.
Yep, so for me being in manufacturing, actually my key stakeholders tend to be operations.
Okay.
So I will have a link in with HR and I will have a discussion with HR about what they want from me with regards to their HR training. But a lot of the time it's speaking to operations about what actually they want. And again, it's very dependent on the role. A group role, you don't tend to get as involved in the actual shop floor day-to-day training. A single site role, you may get involved in the day-to-day shop floor training. So mainly my key stakeholders tend to be operations. So I will report back a lot to operations. My KPIs, I will speak to operations if they're not improving because 9 times out of 10, that's where the main staff force is. And if they're not performing, that's going to affect my KPIs.
Brilliant. No, that makes perfect sense. And what sort of tools and processes, I know you've sort of mentioned on processes, but what tools do you use in particular to assist you?
So I probably go against what a lot of people do. So again, it depends on whether the company has a learning management system. If they have a management system, are they actually using that learning management system? If you are going in to build an L&D department, it's very, very rare that people are using their LMS system properly. So I tend to just put that on one side for the time being. For example, the company I'm with now, I've been here for 8 months. We've got an LMS system. I have not touched it because at the moment, the priority is understanding where we are. So I am very old-fashioned, and I appreciate I'm very old-fashioned, but I have a spreadsheet where I can start to mark off where we're at with regards to things like manual handling training, slips, trips and falls, sexual harassment, all of those basics, so I can very visually see. My next step, which will be part 2, probably the end of this year, will be to launch the LMS system. I need to get people ready and willing to use it, so the more I can sort of say, this is how it's going to improve your life, the better. But if I come in and from day one and say, you have to use this system, that is when you tend to get people saying, I'm not doing it.
Perfect. And that leads on to my next question, sort of, have you had a lot of pushback from leadership, obviously going into a company where it doesn't exist? Can you give us some sort of what you can talk about in a sense?
So it's not necessarily so much pushback. The pushback you receive is, especially within manufacturing, is we can't release our operatives off the shop floor to come and do training. And we are, every manufacturing organisation I've ever worked in has been the same. I've never had an organisation where they go, yeah, we'll send everybody. But that's why it's key to have those relationships with the ops guys, because then you can start to say, just send me a couple of people at a time, or send me a group and we'll do 10 people at a time at the beginning of a shift. And for me, it's all about being flexible. So I will come in, I will do night shifts, I will do, very, very early morning shifts. I will do, if they need me at whatever time, I will be here to help them out, to make sure that we are all getting the targets that we need to get. And that for me is the key, flexibility. If you can show the team that you are flexible, then you tend to find that you get that buy-in more from them. But it doesn't happen overnight. And I think the way I'm making it sound, it's like everybody loves it and everybody wants it to happen overnight. That isn't the case. There will be pushback about why do we need to do this. So, for example, I've had pushback before about, well, why is slips, trips and falls training relevant? Well, actually, we've looked through the insurance claims. One of our biggest claims is slips, trips and falls. Right. Again, it's protecting the business. It's looking at that risk assessment again.
So that would be part of your initial process, actually looking at the claims, because I know you mentioned the health and safety is the starting point almost of the training. So that's incorporated in that. Yeah. And how have you seen the culture change once you've embedded an L&D department?
It's little things. So again, where I'm currently at, as I say, I've been here 8 months. We've by no means embedded the department yet, but just little things like we have started to do the training with people. They get a certificate from it. You start to see people becoming really proud, just the fact that they've got this little bit of paper and this certificate. And for people who have said they've never been trained in anything, they start to see, just by making those little changes, that we are starting to do some training. Regards to other sites that I've had, we've managed to embed it where we've then got one of the best sort of succession planning programs that I've seen and that I've been a part of, because we've then always promoted from within for our sort of team leader and supervisor roles. So when it works really well. It's just not an overnight fix, and that's where, as an L&D manager, I have to be very realistic with my board of directors and say, we are not going to change the world tomorrow. And I've already said to my directors from here, I'm not expecting to see changes until next year at least. Mm-hmm. But you can start to see little changes. You can start to see people be more engaged. When I do training face-to-face with people, they are the ones that say, so you're the lady that's giving us the health and safety training. And so they start to see that there are changes happening. But it's a slow process.
And have you found that people are actually coming to you with training in other areas? So have you seen that started to build up? Yes.
And this is, again, where a problem can lie. So when you are starting up an L&D department from scratch, you obviously have to look at the priorities. So from the moment, the priorities are making sure we're legal, making sure our customer is happy with us. You will then suddenly get people saying that they want to do engineering training, for example, or another specialist training. And they will then just say to you, can you go and find this training? That is when I have to push back and say, look, we've got these priorities we need to work on at the moment. By all means, go and source the training yourself, and then we can have a look whether there's budget available for it. But everybody suddenly thinks there's an L&D person there, they can do all of the stuff for us and we'll throw them all the training. But that's where you have to start to say, no, these are my priorities. And at the moment, that isn't a priority. So that's where you have to be quite hard.
Brilliant. And with you being such a small L&D team with just yourself, so how do you go into an organisation and deliver the training? Are you bringing in external? How does that all work?
So I would love to say we're bringing an external, but we aren't. So this is where I am reliant on people like the HR teams. So for example, one of our first risks that we identified was sexual harassment training. Obviously with the changes to law last year, we knew we had to do something. So I've created the training pack, and then the majority of our HR teams are then delivering it themselves on site. So it's utilising subject matter experts where I can. We have also created a Steps to Success programme, which is about improving our leadership at all levels of the business. So there's 4 different levels to that. So the top two levels, so our level 7 and level 5 as we call them, they are done externally. So we have an executive MBA programme and we have a level 5 apprenticeship that's done externally. However, the other internal team leader training is actually delivered by me. So it's a case of juggling my time between being in the classroom, creating content, and actually doing the rest of the mandatory stuff that I need to do as well. And the only way I can achieve that is by making sure I get people from the sites to help me and to buy into it.
Yeah. And how do you find, sorry, it just relates directly to a podcast that previously recorded where it was about how a small L&D team can have a big impact. And they was in a similar situation, but they just had 2 of them. And Alex basically was talking about how you've got to see your L&D team as much bigger than just what it actually is. You've got to bring in resources, whether that's internal or external. And I would just like to get an understanding as well, when it comes to going out to people within the business, if you needed that internal expert, how do you approach those conversations? Because like you said, taking them away from their role for a day or however long can be challenging. So how do you approach those situations?
So part of the Steps to Success programme is our level 1 for team leaders. So that's great that I can deliver the face-to-face softer skills training, but there's things within that training, for example, understanding manning within their cells, understanding their cell boards. I can't deliver that. So we have to have subject matter experts. So what we've done is I've created the framework of the programme, and then I've sat down individually with subject matter experts, and I'm now in the process of trying to coach them through what they need to include. But again, for each site, it will be very different, which is why it needs to be site-based. So it's basically just sitting down, offering as much help. For example, I'm currently working with one of our sites in the northwest of England who have a paint area. So I'm sitting down with one of their operatives. We're working through step by step how they can make sure that they are training someone properly. I have no idea how to paint an automotive part. You know, it's really not something I've ever been interested in. But I can do the nice bits with him, and he can then tell me the content. So between the 2 of us, we were able to produce something that will be beneficial going forward.
Amazing. And did you get pushback from their managers as such, because you're having to take them away to actually coach them how to deliver effective training?
So I am very lucky in the fact that I report directly into the board of directors. So everybody in the business is very aware of how important the board of directors see my role. I have been involved in directors meetings where the directors have got very clear instructions from the board that anything that I need, they are to support me with. So in that position, I am very lucky. It is the first time I've been in that position. And yes, I have had pushback in previous organisations where it's like, well, that's a training job. That's not that team leader's job. You know, that's when you sort of have to sit down with that manager and explain that actually it is. And if they want decent training, they're going to have to involve a subject matter expert, because I would not give decent training in how to, you know, paint a part or how to switch on a DCM machine and things like that. That's not my forte.
Yeah. Oh, no, interesting. So going back to when you actually come into an L&D function and actually setting it up, what are some of the hardest things about creating a new L&D function?
So the hardest things is getting information. So everybody will have their own information. Everybody will have it stored in different places. You will have some sites which will have actually nothing. They go, well, we've done some training, but we don't document it. So the first thing is understanding where all that information is and then collating it together. And that's probably one of the hardest things, because you feel like you're not achieving anything and you feel like you're not adding value. but actually you've got to do that structural piece before you can do anything else, because there is no point saying, well, we need to do this training if actually we've only just trained it 3 months ago. So it's pulling everything together initially is probably one of the hardest things.
No, that makes sense. And when you mentioned before about you've had pushback from the higher leadership, what were some of the strategies you sort of approached it to sort of explain the benefit of L&D and how you're not there just to be a nuisance, you're actually there to benefit the whole business?
Yeah. So I am very business focused. So one of the things that I will do when I go into a business is look at the business itself. And I tend to sort of think of L&D secondary. So I want to see where, where the business is making money, if it's making money, where the business is losing money, where the business is potentially could have some improvements. Then I can start to speak that language to the ops guys, which is tend to be where you get the pushback. So for example, I can sort of say to an ops guy, if we do relevant training, and let's take health and safety training for example, if we make sure everyone's been through their health and safety training, we make sure their mindset's very different, your productivity will improve because you are not going to be losing people to absence. You are not going to be having accidents. So your other KPIs with regards to accidents will improve. And within manufacturing, people tend to react to KPIs. So if you start to talk their language and say, do you know what, your KPIs will improve, they then tend to come on board.
Brilliant. No, I like that. And what's some of the biggest lessons you've learned from actually doing this role?
So probably I'm just going through that lesson at the moment. So when I joined the business, as I say, back in January, I went around all the sites, spoke to every site director and basically said to each site director, what are the priorities you want from me, as I would do normally. The first thing every site said to me is we need our team leaders to be upskilled. So we've started to upskill our team leaders. But actually, when I'm talking to the team leaders, I'm getting a different picture as well. And we need to be upskilling senior managers as well. So it's, for me, I desperately now need to do a bit of a gap analysis. So training needs analysis and a skill gap analysis, so we can start to see where the gaps in people's knowledge and skill is across the business. And that was already planned in to do in quarter 3 and quarter 4, but it's something that I need to be desperately getting on with now.
Okay, and I'm assuming this comes down to sort of what the conversations go like, but so going back through the steps, so you sort of mentioned step number 1 is very much about identifying, having those conversations. Step 2 is then making sure that you're compliant and doing all the health and safety. Then when does sort of, I know you mentioned in your current role, you're currently on the leadership.
Yeah.
When does the IT training, for example, when does the soft skills training, when does that sort of come along? Is that in the longer, or is it totally down to the questions and those conversations that you have?
So a lot of it will be down to the conversation and questions that happen. I always say a learning and development department will only survive if the foundations are in place. So for me, those foundations are we legally compliant and are we customer compliant? They are the foundations. If we have got those in place, that's when we can start to do the more fun, the more exciting bits. So for me then, the next level is to look at individual roles. And as I was sort of saying, the way I work then is to sit down with department heads, do a bit of a skills gap analysis, but actually do a bit of a training needs analysis. So we look at what does a world-class person in that particular role, what do they need to know? What skills do they need to know? What behaviours do they need to have? What qualifications do they need to have? So we can start to build a big picture of what they need. And I always say to my managers at this point, because this is when they get very excited and think there's an unlimited budget, and I'm like, this is not a shopping list. But this is going to help us going forward. It's going to help us set budgets for next year. It's going to help us identify where we've got some gaps, and it's going to help us identify the priority gaps as well. So from that, you can start to say, do you know what? This person is deemed as a successor in this business to a senior manager. However, they've got a massive gap in, say, communication. We then look at where have we got gaps in communication, and that's when we can start to build the more fun, the more exciting bits. But it has to come sort of from that training needs analysis and that skill gap analysis piece, really. So that would be sort of the walls of your house, I would guess.
Yeah.
But you've got to have that foundation in, and that foundation may take a while to put in. With our compliance at the moment, we're improving month on month, but we're still not at a stage where I'm happy. So We've got to build that structure first.
Perfect. And how do you plan to keep the compliance up moving forward? Obviously, you're coming in, you're making sure everyone's got that, but then with compliance, it has to be done every so many years. What are your plans that you're going to attack that situation?
So this is when we then start to use our learning management system. So if we can get everybody compliant by the end of this year in our key areas, we can then put all of that information on our learning management system. We can then use our learning management system to trigger that reminder in 3 years' time. So it's pain for the first sort of year because you're doing it manually almost on a spreadsheet, but going forward it becomes a lot easier. And that's where as well you pass it back over to the sites if it's a multi-site role. So again, I will make the sites responsible for their own KPIs. So at the moment I'm helping them with their KPIs, but from next year they will be responsible. Right. The other thing that we do as well is I have to report into the board every month. So I have to do a learning and development slide for the board, which shows all of my KPIs as well, so they can see we are having progression. That will also then continue as well. So if we start to drop back on any of our mandatory training, the board will be saying to me, why aren't you doing what you're supposed to be doing? It's within manufacturing, and I know a lot of organisations don't use KPIs as much now, but within manufacturing, KPIs are still king.
Yeah, I really enjoy how you describe that and how you look at it. And it's sort of, when it comes to ROI, you're very much business. And I think that's how you can have a real impact within organisations, because everyone understands the simple metrics almost and where the business is going. So I think that's probably part of why you're finding this role enjoyable, maybe.
Yeah. And think simple things. When I took on this role, the board had already decided that they wanted, as one of the whole business KPIs, one of the group KPIs was they wanted to have an average hour training per year KPI for all of its employees. So because it's the first year they'd done it, they hadn't got a clue, so they just guessed at a figure. So we have a figure at the moment of every employee within the business should do a minimum of 5 hours average training. And again, we're reporting on that on a monthly basis, and we are starting to hit that target. So it was a very, very slow start, January to March. March upwards, you can start to see that improvement. So setting things like that has been really helpful too.
Brilliant. No, good to hear the momentum starting. That's what we like.
Yeah.
So looking back at your early builds, what's something you wish you had known then that you know now?
I am a support function. Sometimes with the early builds, I was very much like, but I want to do this training because it's fun. I want to do communication training on day one because it's really fun. So you bring a load of people in, they're sat there and they're like, we don't really know why we're here. And it wasn't business aligned. I probably didn't put as much of the structure in place that should have been put in place. So very, very early on, we'd get non-conformances in audits because I hadn't done the basics. So you learn very quickly when you have a non-conformance in an audit that actually that's where you need to start. So it's put those basics in place. If you put the basics in place and you can build on it, that's when you can build and really start to embed the culture within a business.
No, brilliant. And if someone listening today is the first hire at an L&D company, and this is before they've even started, what's one piece of advice you give them before they start?
Definitely think about how you're eating the elephant. So do not try and eat the elephant in one go, because everybody will suddenly say, we have L&D, we can do all of this training, well, you can do this training, you can do that training. No. Put yourself a bit of a plan together, give yourself a bit of a timeline, and you don't have to share that with anybody. It can be just something which you are working towards. But I always put a bit of a plan, even if it's just in my head now. But I say, right, by March I want to do this, by September I want to do this, by December I want to do this. But be realistic as well and realise that it will take a lot longer than you expect to embed that culture, because you will get resistance, especially in manufacturing, as I say, with people being released from the shop floor. And don't think that you are failing if it's not moving as quickly as you want it to. So certainly with regards to some of the mandatory and the legal training, nobody wants to do it, so it's not going to happen overnight. But if you can show that you are progressing, that shows that you are actually achieving something. So don't think because you've not suddenly hit your target that you're a failure. You're definitely not. It takes time.
That makes perfect sense, and thanks for summarising that. So Louise, I would like to thank you very much for joining me on the podcast. I've really enjoyed this discussion.
Good, glad. If anyone wants any more help, then they can reach out to me, not a problem.
Amazing. And that's another episode. Thanks very much.